The things that I am about to tell you will transform radically our perception of our position in the universe. The James Webb Space Telescope has only spotted something in the Three-Eye Atlas that does not belong just 48 hours ago, something which must not exist. There is something here that makes one think that this interstellar traveler is not just transporting alien chemistry, but also alien life. Its analysis is still in progress, but early findings indicate structured molecular structures which display properties that scientists could only have dreamed of discovering. Patterns in the electromagnetic emissions, which pulse with mathematical accuracy, and chemical evidence which seems to be responding to our observations. It is what they do not want you to know, the discovery, which can revise all the textbooks about life in the universe. And it is all going on in an object that has been speeding our way billions of years, as though it was aware when and where to come. Do not forget to give that like button a like and subscribe to more discoveries in space, which will not be reported by mainstream media. 3 weeks ago, it began as normal spectroscopic examination. A team of scientists at the Space Telescope Science Institute had been carrying out observations using standard atlas when they realized that something was observed, getting them to doubt their own tools. The IR signatures were not only demonstrating exotic chemistry, they were demonstrating organized complexity that was reminiscent of biological processes. Initially, they thought it must be instrumental error. Webb, with his sensors, is so sensitive, and the cosmic radiation can occasionally form false patterns on the data. However, the patterns were consistent after running check calibration and comparing with backup instruments. Worse still, they appeared to increase in strength as Atlas neared the Sun. The molecular signatures emerged of long-chain carbon compounds, self-assembling themselves into more and more complex structures, not the starting point of organic existence, but the systematic assembly into patterns which we, on Earth, associate with early life on Earth. The initial response given by the team when they finally got in touch with their supervisors at NASA Goddard was one of utter cynicism. However, when the initial data was considered, the results were immediately coded and a review board was created. After 24 hours, it was under discussion at the highest ranks of NASA, the European Space Agency, and subterranean military space surveillance stations. The consequences were too monumental to be published without a great deal of verifying. Provided that Atlas contained some type of life, perhaps of the simplest organic chemistry, it would be the first established discovery of alien biology. Still looming over it, however, were indications of something deeper still, something more evidence of organized complexity apparently adapting to environmental alterations as it cooled down heading to our Sun. The infrared resolution pioneered by Webb started, discovering molecular structures that did not exist in the cold vacuum environment of space, complex organic polymers, long thousands of molecular units, chirality, the left and right-handed configuration, which are characteristic of biological chemistry here on Earth. The carbon chains were not randomly arranged. They were preferentially handed, as in the case of amino acids on Earth. This is one of the biggest mysteries of biology. Why do living systems always prefer one of these orientations as opposed to the other? The fact that the same taste is shared by the object of an interstellar implies contamination or cosmic convergent evolution. Of more interest were the phosphorus signatures. Phosphorus is not very common in the space, yet it is an important element of life as it is. Webb found the backbone molecules of DNA and RNA, organophosphates, in concentrations that appeared implausibly high as a product of natural cosmic chemistry. These were not isolated traces, they were large percentages of volatile makeup of Atlas. The sulfur signatures narrated an equally interesting story. Webb discovered the existence of complex sulfur-containing organic molecules in the same way Earth extreme environments, deep-sea hydrothermal vents, acidic hot springs, and underground bacterial communities are. Such compounds usually demand certain temperature and pressure parameters which should not be present in a comet nucleus. Most importantly is the fact that Webb observed trace levels of methane with isotopic labels that would indicate the presence of biological creation. The ratios of carbon-12 to carbon-13 were in line with the methanogenic processes, primitive metabolic pathways yielding methane as byproducts. The fact that the similar signatures were found in an interstellar object suggests that the object was contaminated, or the biochemistry acted in what can only be described as completely alien environments. As Webb kept observing Atlas, the spectral data showed something even more striking, which were electromagnetic emissions with mathematical pulsation, not random fluctuations, but structured formations pointing to information processing at the molecular scale. The pulses adhered to the number sequences 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, and the repetitions were in the cycle of 23.6 minutes. This coincided with the rotation period of the Atlas by exactly the same amount, and was believed to indicate that whatever was producing the signals was also spread over the surface of the comet and was reacting to the cycles of solar illumination. Prime numbers do not arise in astrophysical operations. They must be organized computationally, which is the type of mathematical activity that comes with intelligence, biological intelligence or artificial intelligence. The finding caused ripples in the astronomy community as well as the SETI community. The signal strength was affected by the distance of Atlas to the Sun, but not in the manner it would have based on simple thermal considerations. Rather, the emissions appeared to intensify with the intensity of the solar radiation, as though the energy was being collected and made into orderly electromagnetic patterns. The comet was not merely the reflector or re-emitter of solar energy, it was processing it. Worst of all was the fact that the signal patterns had been slowly evolving during the weeks of observation. Older records possessed simpler mathematical series, though in recent years there have been more complex and sophisticated ones. Whatever had been giving these signs seemed to be learning, adjusting, or waking up on its way to our solar system. Another unattainable property of Webb that was found in thermal imaging is that Atlas was retaining temperatures that were much higher than the solar heating processes would have been able to account for. The surface that was contacted experienced the expected temperatures depending on the distance to the Sun, but the thermal patterns on the inside indicated that the area was actively heating. The patterns of the temperature gradients were similar to the biological thermoregulation. Living organisms ensure the best temperatures with help of metabolic processes, and Atlas appeared to be following the same pattern on a massive scale. Internal areas had constant temperatures when the external situations were unpredictable. The mapping of the infrared revealed hotspots in place which vibrated with the electromagnetic emissions. Such thermal fluctuations were not accidental, and they were subject to the same mathematical patterns discovered in the radio signals. The comet was observed to be undergoing a well-integrated thermal and electromagnetic behavior throughout its structure. The heat field was in contravention of the fundamental physics of a passive object in space. Computer simulations anticipated that the Atlas would have been cooling over time with the volatility evaporating out. Rather, the comet was becoming warmer and warmer towards perihelion, indicating the generation of energy instead of the continuation of it. The best part was that the thermal patterns also exhibited a response nature when the Webb instruments were scanning. When the object is under close examination, its internal temperatures would change marginally, like the object had known that it was being examined and had made some changes to its activity. This is an inherent property of living systems that makes them responsive to the environment. The electromagnetic patterns of Atlas became more complex as Webb kept on with its observations. Simple mathematical sequences were developed into complex modulated signals, which were similar to communication protocols. The trends implied not only mathematical processing, but also information exchange and learning. The signals were analyzed by teams of analysts who found hidden within the signals more intricate mathematical patterns, sometimes encoded by secondary modulations of the primary carriers. Primary carriers used prime number sequences, but secondary modulations represented more complex mathematical patterns, such as Fibonacci sequences, geometric series constants pi the golden ratio. The signals exhibited mathematical understanding, which transcended on mere organizational computation. More importantly, the signals started to react to the human technological activity. As the scanning intensity of the instruments operated by Webb was raised, the electromagnetic emissions of Atlas would change frequency and grow more intricate. As ground telescopes using radio became members of the observation campaign, new signal patterns were observed, which also used the same frequencies as human instruments. These two-way interactions indicated that Atlas was not simply a signal-sending system, but one that received and processed information in its environment. The object seemed to be conscious of the high level of human attention, and it was reacting with more complex communication patterns. The most alarming situation was the fact that the signals were also starting to adopt some features of human mathematical notation and scientific constants. Base 10 notation numbers, mentions of atomic masses of familiar elements, even what was likely an attempt to replicate the structure of the periodic table. Something was getting acquainted with human science and trying to express oneself with the already known ideas. With the growing evidence of highly structured complexity in Atlas, scientists started to suggest that they were observing not a single organism, but a group intelligence, a distributed biological system, an overlay of coordinated information processing throughout the whole structure of the comet. This theory was compared to examples of collective intelligence on Earth, ant colonies, neural networks, and microbial communities with the emergent properties that their constituent parts do not have. These phenomena may be scaled up to Atlas. Billions of little things may make one cognitive system. This hypothesis was supported by the distributed character of the electromagnetic emissions of Atlas. Messages were sent out of several points on the surface of the comet and organized in a manner that indicated that there was communication between the points on large parts of the comet. The mathematical patterns demanded the computational resources that were spread across the structure of the object. The use of thermal mapping showed what could be taken as information processing networks, paths of slightly high temperatures that linked the different sites of signal generation. These heat conductors were like neural tubes, and they offered an avenue of speedy information exchange within the interior of the comet. The behavior of Atlas in learning was also explained by the collective intelligence model. Single instances could be restricted in their cognitive functions, but group systems may have emergent intelligence that is more than the result of the sum of the parts. The more and more advanced methods of communication used in Atlas may represent this process of distributed learning in millions or even billions of microscopic entities that coordinate their activities. The biological activity became very intense as Atlas neared perihelion on October 29th. According to Webb observations, the growth in production of organic compounds, complexity of electromagnetic signals, and complexity of thermal regulation chose exponential growth. The processes that were taking place inside the comet were hitting maximum activity levels. After perihelion, the biological activity of Atlas passed to a new stage which gave the unambiguous evidence of the organized life processes. The solar heating had caused what would only be called reproduction, that is, the creation of smaller structured components which detached themselves to form the body of a comet. These daughter objects shared all the properties of the parent body: complex organic chemistry, generation of electromagnetic signals, and thermal regulation. However, there were distinct signal patterns that indicated individual identity in the greater collective intelligence. Atlas had not only survived perihelion, it had spawned. Subsequent observations by Webb had shown that the process of reproduction was very organized as opposed to random fragmentation. The daughter objects were also sent into orbits, which would send them out to various areas of the solar system, especially out to Mars and the outer planets in which there could have been conditions that will still allow the existence of life. The important point is that the signals of Atlas and its descendants service indicated coordination, which validated collective intelligence. Several objects produced identical signal patterns that formed the interference effect that coded yet more complicated information. The communication over the growing distance was being sustained by the distributed system, and this implied some degree of organization that went beyond the survival of individuals. 3. Weeks subsequent to the perihelion, SETI teams had the breakthrough, which confirmed intelligent communication with Atlas, responding to mathematical signals by the comet, with similar mathematical replies, shot out by huge radio telescopes. They had initiated the first two-way communication with alien intelligence. It started very simply. Atlas sent prime number sequences and Earth sent the following numbers in the sequence. The comet responded instantly, with more complicated mathematical relations, showing the understanding of human response.